The air was alive at night in the Middle Ages, or so they believed. It crept beneath doors, slid through cracks in the shutters, and coiled in the corners of the room like an unseen serpent. To breathe it was to gamble with your life. Imagine it. The year is 1348. A village somewhere in England lies silent under a moon the color of bone. The streets are empty. The wells have gone still. From within the small thatched cottages, you hear only coughing, ragged, desperate, human. Inside one home, a mother moves from bed to bed, checking her children's foreheads. Each breath she takes feels heavy, thick, almost alive. When she finishes, she does what every mother in Europe had learned to do that year. She shuts the wooden shutters tight and seals the cracks with rags. Not a sliver of the outside air will be allowed in, because in the darkness beyond her walls, death drifts on the wind. This was not ignorance, it was logic. To medieval minds, the air itself was dangerous. They believed in miasma, the bad air born from rot, swamp, and decay. You couldn't see it, but you could smell it. The reek of the sewers, the stench of animals, the sour perfume of unburied bodies. When plague came, doctors didn't look for rats or fleas. They looked to the air. The world, they said, was poisoned, and night was when the poison spread. Windows were not portals of comfort, but shields against death. Every household kept them closed from dusk until dawn. To open them was to invite in sickness, spirits, and sin. The wind was not pure, it was corrupt, tainted with the breath of demons or the exhalation of the damned. Even the church agreed. Priests warned their flocks, "Beware the air of the night, for it moves as Satan moves, unseen, whispering, deadly." And so people sealed themselves in. They lived by firelight, by the smell of smoke and sweat and candle wax. The air indoors was thick, stale, and warm. But it was safe, or so they hoped. Curtains hung heavy to block the drafts. Windows, small as a man's hand, were shuttered tight with wood or covered with stretched animal skin that let in only a dim orange glow from the hearth. In noble houses, servants made rounds each evening to bolt every shutter before the master, and his family went to sleep. Children grew up afraid of the night air. They were taught not to open doors after sundown, not to stand near a window if they heard the wind moan, not to sleep facing the cracks in the walls. The air was a living thing, capable of slipping through the smallest gaps, capable of killing in silence. But behind this fear was something deeper, something ancient. The medieval world believed the body and the world were reflections of each other. The wind could unbalance the humors inside you. The cold could make your blood sluggish, your phlegm thick, your soul heavy. Night air was especially cruel, cold, damp, and corrupted by shadow. It could twist the balance of your body and spirit alike. And so the people slept with their windows closed, trusting in their fires, their prayers, and their walls to hold the night at bay. The irony, of course, was brutal. Inside those sealed rooms, air grew foul, smoke thickened, sickness spread. But they didn't know that yet. To them, closing the window wasn't foolishness. It was wisdom, passed down through generations. Outside, the wind carried the scent of the fields and the whisper of death. Inside, the shutters creaked as the last candle flickered out. The air stood still, and for a brief, trembling moment, it felt as though the world itself was holding its breath. Medieval homes were not built for beauty or comfort. They were built for survival. Every wall, every beam, every shutter was a defense, not only against the cold and the thieves that prowled after dark, but against the very air itself. Imagine stepping into a peasant's cottage at dusk. The door is low, the ceiling lower still. Smoke curls lazily from a central hearth, its warmth the only light besides the faint, trembling flame of a tallow candle. The air is thick, half wood smoke, half the scent of damp wool and earth. The single window, small and square, is shut tight with a wooden board. A scrap of old cloth or animal hide hangs across it, softening the draught that seeps in through the cracks. Outside, the wind howls through the thatch, but inside, everything is sealed. Safe. Suffocating. Still. In the medieval mind, a home wasn't a space for fresh air. It was a fortress against it. Peasants built their cottages from wattle and daub, thin wooden strips coated with mud, straw, and manure. It wasn't airtight, but it felt like protection. The walls breathed, but not enough to invite the night in. Roofs were made of straw or reeds, thick enough to trap warmth, and often shared with the animals that lived below. In many households, the cow or pig slept only a few feet away, its body heat helping to warm the room. The price of warmth was the smell. The cost of comfort was the air you could never quite breathe. For nobles, the walls were thicker, the windows larger, but the fear was the same. Stone castles and timber manors were as much prisons as palaces once night fell. The great halls that glimmered with light by day became chambers of shadow. When the sun dipped below the horizon, servants moved silently through the corridors, closing heavy wooden shutters and fastening iron bars across every opening. Curtains were drawn, not for privacy, but for protection. The lady of the house might even hang sweet herbs, lavender, rosemary, mint, above her bed to purify the air trapped within. Few homes had glass in their windows before the 15th century. For most, a window meant an open hole covered by linen or parchment soaked in oil to let in a little light. The poor used greased animal bladders or horn, thin enough to glow, thick enough to block the wind. When the temperature dropped or the air grew foul, these coverings were sealed with wax or mud. Fresh air was a luxury no one trusted. And yet, for all their fear, these homes were not lifeless. They pulsed with sound and warmth, the crackle of firewood, the murmur of prayers, the rhythm of survival. A closed window meant the world stayed outside, the wolves, the wind, the sickness. A home was a fragile bubble of safety in a world that could kill you for breathing too deeply. The architecture of the Middle Ages tells the story of this paranoia. Houses leaned inward, roofs sloped low, windows faced the courtyard rather than the open fields. Even monasteries, built for silence and reflection, had narrow, shuttered slits instead of open arches. When storms came, monks and peasants alike barred every hole and prayed the night would pass without fever or misfortune. Ironically, what they built to protect them often turned against them. The air inside these homes was stagnant and heavy. Smoke blackened the beams, coated the lungs, and slowly poisoned the people it was meant to keep warm. Children coughed themselves to sleep beside hearths that never went out. Still, no one dared open a window, not at night. They believed the sickness waiting outside was worse than anything inside. To live in the Middle Ages was to live inside a box, dark, warm, and sealed from the world. Every home was a breathing thing, holding its family within like lungs that never exhaled. The windows stayed closed because life was fragile. The night was full of unseen dangers, and the line between home and death was no thicker than a shutter. As the last fire embers faded and the walls held their silence, the people of the Middle Ages learned one truth we still feel, even now. Safety never comes without a cost. To a medieval mind, air was not just the invisible stuff of life. It was medicine, poison, and mystery all at once. They could feel it on their skin, smell it on the wind, watch it stir the smoke above the hearth. But what they could not see, they feared. And from that fear, they built an entire science, one that ruled how they lived, how they slept, and even how they breathed. Physicians of the Middle Ages believed that air carried invisible particles called miasma, the breath of rot and corruption. When a plague spread through a city, when a fever took a village, the doctors didn't look for fleas or infection. They looked to the air that moved through graveyards, through swamps, through streets heavy with waste. This was the killer. It seeped into lungs and poisoned the humors, the delicate fluids that governed all life within the body: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The miasma theory was no superstition. It was science, or at least the closest thing to it. Medieval medicine was built upon the teachings of Galen and Hippocrates, ancient authorities who saw the body as a landscape in constant need of balance. Warm air could cure melancholy, cold air could breed it. Too much dampness brought fever, too much dryness, madness. Physicians categorized air the way we categorize food. It had qualities, temperaments, and moods. And of all the airs, none was more feared than the night air. Night air was the enemy. Cold and moist, it corrupted the body's warmth, slowed the blood, and opened the pores. Doctors warned that sleeping near a draft could cause palsy or paralysis. To leave a window open was to invite sickness directly into the chest. "Take care," one 14th century physician wrote, "that the air which enters your chamber be neither cold nor damp, nor that which hath lately touched the earth." For in their minds, the air itself could carry the essence of death. To fight this invisible danger, people turned their homes into laboratories of scent. The wealthy burned incense, frankincense, sandalwood, rosemary, to cleanse the air. Monks hung herbs in doorways: sage, lavender, mint. Poorer families burned bundles of straw or animal dung, believing that the smoke itself sealed the space from corruption. The air inside might sting the eyes, but it smelled safer than the one outside. Even physicians followed rituals that seem strange to us now. They soaked cloths in vinegar and herbs and tied them around their faces to filter out miasma, an early, almost desperate form of the surgical mask. When plague swept across Europe, the plague doctors filled the long beaks of their leather masks with flowers, camphor, and cloves to protect their lungs from bad air. They thought the scent could save them. People took precautions in their sleep, too. They avoided opening windows at night, but also avoided sleeping near them. Beds were pulled away from the walls. Curtains were drawn thick around them, creating cocoons of still air. In noble houses, servants checked every shutter before the family retired, pressing their hands along the edges to feel for leaks. If air could move, death could follow. But in their fear of the unseen, they missed what was right in front of them. The same sealed homes that kept the night out also trapped smoke, rot, and disease within. The very air they tried to purify slowly choked them. The bad air they feared wasn't always outside. It was the air they breathed every day. Still, the belief endured because it made sense in a world without microscopes, without knowledge of germs. When death came after a damp, foggy night, what else could they blame? The miasma theory gave order to chaos. It gave names to the nameless. And for a time, it worked. Herbal vapors did drive away pests. Vinegar did cleanse wounds. Smoke did kill fleas. Their ignorance wasn't folly. It was survival, disguised as faith. So they slept with windows closed, candles burning, herbs hanging from their rafters. Not because they were foolish, but because they were human. They feared what they couldn't see, and they did what any of us would do in their place. They tried to control the air they breathed. Because in the Middle Ages, every breath was a prayer, and every open window was a risk that God might not answer it. In the Middle Ages, the line between science and superstition was thin, as fragile as the candlelight that flickered against a stone wall. People didn't just fear sickness in the night air, they feared what rode upon it. The darkness wasn't empty. It was alive with things unseen, spirits, demons, witches, and the wandering dead. To open a window after sunset was to open a door into another world. The medieval night was not like ours. There were no streetlights, no glowing cities, no hum of electricity. When the sun vanished, the world turned black, an ocean of shadow. Even the stars, veiled by smoke and cloud, offered little comfort. To walk outside at midnight was to disappear into mystery. The wind moaned through the thatch. Owls screamed from church towers. Wolves howled beyond the fields. Every sound felt like a whisper meant for you. And if a cold draft brushed your neck, you didn't think of the weather. You thought of the dead. People believed the souls of sinners roamed the night, condemned to wander until they found rest. These restless spirits were drawn to light, warmth, and the scent of life. A window left open was an invitation. Many villages told stories of those who died in their sleep after leaving the shutters unbolted. The explanation was always the same. A spirit had entered, suffocated them, or stolen their breath. Church doctrine deepened this fear. Clergymen taught that the devil and his servants prowled at night, seeking entry through cracks and openings. Evil came on the wind, unseen but not unfelt. That's why priests blessed homes with holy water and marked lintels with crosses. In some regions, families hung bunches of garlic or St. John's wort above windows, not for their scent, but for their power. A flower could become a shield if faith filled it. Even the air itself was suspected of moral corruption. Night vapors, theologians wrote, were the breath of demons exhaled upon the world. To inhale them was to invite spiritual sickness, madness, temptation, or despair. Those who slept with open windows risked not only their bodies, but their souls. In castles and cottages alike, bedtime became a ritual of protection. Before sleep, families would whisper prayers, sprinkle salt across thresholds, or make the sign of the cross toward the window. Mothers warned their children never to gaze out after dark, lest something gaze back. Superstition and fear blended into instinct, a reflex that said, "Seal the shutters before the night comes." Yet fear also gave birth to beauty. Across Europe, folklore painted the night with vivid colors: the wild hunt sweeping across the sky, the dead riding in storms, spirits known as mare or alp slipping through windows to sit on sleepers' chests, suffocating them, the origin of the word nightmare. People didn't just imagine these things, they felt them. In a world without science, sensation was evidence. If you awoke breathless in the dark, something had been there. Even the architecture reflected this dread. Windows were placed high and small, difficult to open. In churches, stained glass became more than art. It was a magical barrier. Light could pass through, but evil could not. Every shutter closed at dusk was a prayer made of wood. Every latch was an act of faith. And in that faith, they found peace. The family gathered close, the hearth still burning, the windows sealed. The world outside, of spirits and sickness, of death and sin, was shut away. Inside, under the watchful glow of a single candle, they believed themselves protected. Yet, as the flame dimmed and the wind rattled the shutters, one could not help but wonder, was the danger truly outside, or waiting within the air they refused to let go? If you stepped inside the chamber of a medieval noble at night, you might think you'd entered a place of safety and splendor. Velvet drapes hung thick across carved wooden windows. The air smelled of roses and myrrh, of burning wax and rich fabrics. A fire roared in the hearth, its light licking the gold thread tapestries and polished floors. Yet, behind all that luxury, there was something suffocating, a stillness so heavy you could feel it press against your lungs. This was not the stillness of peace. It was the stillness of fear. In the Middle Ages, the wealthy lived by the same rule as the poor: keep the night air out. But they practiced it with elegance and ritual. Physicians advised the nobility to close every window at dusk, to seal every opening with heavy curtains. The idea was simple. The air outside was corrupted. Only air that had been tamed by fire, fragrance, or holy blessing could be trusted. So they filled their rooms with perfumes and incense, believing that pleasant smells were not just comforting, but protective. Their chambers became sanctuaries, or tombs. In noble households, the sick were often confined to their rooms with windows bolted tight. Doctors of the day warned against letting the wind of the street touch a fevered patient's skin. A draught, they said, could worsen the imbalance of humors. The air had to be still, warm, and heavy. So the patient lay sweating in the dark, surrounded by tapestries, smoke, and the faint sound of prayers whispered by a servant at the door. This wasn't neglect. It was medicine. To heal, one had to balance the body's humors, and air played a crucial role. Warm air was good for those suffering from melancholy. Cold air, they said, made the heart weak. Physicians recommended that windows remain shut even during the day, and that the room be fumigated with crushed herbs and burning juniper. The sick were made to breathe through cloths soaked in vinegar or rosewater. It was believed that these scents sweetened the air, warding off death itself. But the irony was cruel. These same precautions often hastened the patient's end. The sealed rooms grew thick with the smell of sweat and infection. The flames that were meant to purify the air consumed oxygen instead. Servants coughed in the shadows, while their masters gasped on embroidered pillows, dying in the safety they'd built for themselves. Even kings were not spared. During the Great Plague of the 14th century, the royal physicians of France advised closing every window in the palace and burning bonfires of herbs in the corridors. The court filled with the scent of rosemary and pitch, but also with death. The air that could have carried away the sickness was trapped inside, circling endlessly like a curse. Still, the idea of air as medicine persisted. Wealthy families believed they could control it, make it pure, holy, obedient. They hung pomanders of amber, musk, and cloves from their belts to filter the air they breathed. They burned frankincense at night, not just for devotion, but for survival. The poor sealed their windows with cloth. The rich sealed theirs with silk. Yet both were prisoners of the same invisible fear. When morning came, the shutters opened for a brief hour. Servants would throw open the windows to refresh the room before their masters awoke. The sunlight revealed smoke stains on the ceiling, stale air trembling in the light, proof of the long, breathless night that had passed. Then, before dusk, they closed the world away again. To live in luxury in the Middle Ages was not to breathe freely, but to smother in comfort. Behind their silks and perfumes, the nobles shared the same fate as the peasants, trapped between superstition and survival, both terrified of the same unseen killer, the air itself. And as plague, fever, and madness spread, one question whispered through every sealed room. What if the danger they kept out was nothing compared to the one they trapped inside? If the medieval window was the enemy, the hearth was the guardian. It was the center of every home, the symbol of warmth, family, and faith. Yet beneath its glow lurked a quieter truth. Fire gave life, but it also slowly killed those who depended on it. Picture a winter's night in the 13th century. Snow piles against the cottage door, the fields outside swallowed by blackness. Inside, the family huddles around a small open hearth. Sparks rise into the rafters, dancing in the smoke that gathers beneath the roof beams. The fire crackles, the children's faces shine in its light, and all around them, the air thickens with soot. The windows, nailed shut for warmth, trap the smoke inside like breath in a coffin. In those days, the fire was everything. It cooked the food, heated the room, dried the clothes, and frightened away the dark. But it also filled the air with invisible poison. The only way for smoke to escape was through a hole in the roof, if the family could afford to have one. Most could not. They endured the fumes because to open a window was unthinkable. Fresh air was deadly. Smoky air was safe. In a strange way, fire replaced the window. It purified the space, driving out bad air through heat and scent. The miasma could not survive flame, they believed. So families burned whatever they had, wood, straw, peat, even dung, believing that the smoke itself carried holiness. Many called it God's breath. When the wind outside howled, people drew closer to the hearth, as if the flames themselves formed a barrier against the night. But there was a cost. The smoke that blackened the rafters also blackened lungs. Chronic coughing, wheezing, and the black phlegm were common in households that never aired. The medieval home was a paradox. Its warmth was poison, its safety suffocating. Peasants and nobles alike bore the marks of it: soot-stained walls, inflamed eyes, and breath that rattled like a dying fire. And yet they loved the hearth. It was sacred. In pagan tradition, the hearth was the home's spirit, the dwelling place of household gods. Christianity inherited this reverence. Fire became purity, the element of resurrection. Every Easter, priests blessed a new fire, symbolizing Christ's triumph over death. In homes, the flame was never allowed to die completely. To let it go out was bad luck, a sign of God's displeasure. At night, before sleep, the last act was always the same: banking the fire. The coals were buried beneath ash to smolder until morning. The windows stayed closed, the door barred, and the air thick with heat and smoke. It was a kind of pact, a fragile balance between suffocation and survival. Even the great castles of the nobility were not immune. Their grand hearths filled massive halls with smoke that clung to every surface. Servants coughed as they tended the flames, their lungs lined with ash. In winter, nobles slept in smoky chambers, comforted by the fire's warmth, but waking to headaches and dizziness they couldn't explain. They thought it was the bad vapors leaving the body. It was, in truth, carbon monoxide. Despite all this, fire remained untouchable, a living miracle. It made the air breathable by burning away the invisible, and so no one dared to question its power. People prayed beside it, were baptized by its light, and even used it to heal. When plague came, they carried torches through the streets, believing the smoke would cleanse the town. In a way, it did, at least in spirit. To live in the Middle Ages was to walk the line between faith and fire. You could not see the poison that filled your home, but you could feel the warmth that kept you alive. And in a world where the cold wind could kill as surely as disease, people chose smoke over fear, ignorance over freezing truth. When the last embers dimmed, the family would whisper their prayers, trusting that the night would pass. The air would grow still, the shutters hold firm, and the unseen world would stay outside, waiting, as it always did, just beyond the flame. For centuries, the people of Europe slept behind sealed shutters, their faith in still air unshaken. But no superstition can last forever. By the dawn of the Renaissance, a quiet rebellion began to stir, not in the streets, but in the minds of those who dared to question the invisible. Scholars, doctors, and architects started to wonder, what if the air that they feared was not their enemy, but their salvation? The first challenge came from observation. After the Black Death ravaged Europe, city physicians began keeping detailed notes. They noticed that people who lived in cleaner, breezier quarters, near the sea, on high ground, or in well-ventilated monasteries, seemed to survive epidemics more often. The poor, trapped in stifling rooms thick with smoke and decay, perished faster. Something didn't add up. If bad air came from the outside, then why were the sealed homes the deadliest? In Italy, thinkers like Girolamo Fracastoro began to whisper heresies against miasma theory. He suggested that diseases might spread through tiny living seeds, seminaria contagionis, that moved from person to person, not through the air itself. It was a fragile idea, centuries before germ theory, but it cracked the ancient fear open. Air was no longer a mystical enemy. It was a medium, a messenger. At the same time, architecture began to change. The Renaissance adored light. Builders carved larger windows into stone walls, replacing parchment with panes of glass. For the first time, people could see the world outside without touching it. Sunlight poured into rooms where once only darkness had dwelled. The air that had once been locked out was now invited to shimmer in beams of gold. Wealthy nobles commissioned homes with open courtyards and arcades designed to breathe. Venetian architects drew inspiration from ancient Rome, where open-air atriums symbolized health and abundance. Even monasteries, once sealed tight for silence, began adding cloisters filled with flowing air and light. The new belief was subtle but revolutionary. The body needed to breathe as the soul did. Still, the fear did not vanish overnight. Old habits die slower than plagues. Many people continued to seal their windows at dusk, convinced that the night carried invisible sickness. Doctors clung to the idea of miasma, mixing it with new theories instead of abandoning it. The result was an uneasy balance. People burned herbs not only to chase away evil air, but also to refresh it, a sign that their faith was shifting, not breaking. Even kings were cautious. When the court of Henry VIII introduced glass windows to English palaces, physicians warned the king not to sleep with them open. "The night's breath is unwholesome," they said, and the monarch obeyed. But in France and Italy, nobles began leaving their shutters ajar to let in the morning sun, a quiet defiance of fear. In the 16th century, the rise of public health reforms gave this new thinking strength. City planners widened streets, drained swamps, and built fountains to cleanse the air. Though they still believed in miasma, the effect was real. Better air circulation meant fewer outbreaks. The logic had shifted, not from superstition to science yet, but from avoidance to improvement. The air was no longer to be hidden from, but managed, controlled, cultivated. And then came the invention that changed everything: glass. With glass, one could see without exposure. The window became not a barrier, but a lens between man and nature. Where once a shutter had symbolized protection, a window now symbolized understanding. To look out and not die was, in itself, proof that the world was changing. Still, as night fell across Europe, many hands hesitated over the latch. The darkness still whispered through the cracks. The fire still burned. And the oldest fear of all, the fear of what you could not see, still lingered in the breath of every sleeper. But the first seeds of freedom had been planted. Air was beginning to mean life again. When the first rays of dawn slipped through the narrow cracks of a medieval shutter, it must have felt like the world itself exhaled. For centuries, people had feared the unseen, the air, the darkness, the silence between breaths. But as time carried the world from the medieval into the modern, one truth began to emerge, quiet and slow as the sunrise. The air had never been the enemy. Fear was. By the 17th and 18th centuries, glass windows were no longer a luxury for kings. They became symbols of a new kind of confidence, the idea that man could master nature, not hide from it. Where the medieval world sealed its homes tight, the Enlightenment world flung them open. Architects built tall, airy rooms designed to let sunlight and wind circulate freely. Fresh air became fashionable, even medicinal. Doctors began prescribing it for everything from melancholy to tuberculosis. But even as they opened their windows, humanity's oldest instinct, the need to control the unseen, remained. The miasma theory lingered, reshaped by science but not destroyed. The Victorians still believed foul air carried disease. They simply believed they could outsmart it. Cities built sewer systems and wide boulevards not only for sanitation, but to let the wind purify the streets. Air became civilization's mirror. The cleaner it was, the more moral a society claimed to be. Yet beneath the progress, the ghosts of the Middle Ages still whispered. When pandemics returned, people closed their doors and sealed their homes once again. During cholera, during influenza, even during modern outbreaks centuries later, we returned, instinctively, to the same act. We shut the window. We lit the fire. We waited for the danger to pass. It is strange, isn't it? We live in an age of purified air, filtered, conditioned, recirculated. We fear pollution and pathogens, just as our ancestors feared miasma and demons. We design our homes to be airtight fortresses, not against evil spirits, but against weather, noise, and dust. We've traded incense for air fresheners, herbs for HEPA filters, shutters for double-glazed glass. But the instinct is the same. Deep down, we still believe safety lies in stillness. And so, in a way, we have come full circle. The medieval peasant, huddled by the hearth with the window bolted shut, would recognize our modern comforts all too well. Our sealed apartments, our climate-controlled air, our fear of what moves unseen outside. The faces have changed, the tools have evolved, but the heart of it remains. Humanity's longing to control what cannot be tamed. What the people of the Middle Ages knew, and what we have perhaps forgotten, is that the air is never still. It moves through us, between us, across centuries. It carries not only breath and life, but memory. The smoke of their fires, the breath of their fear. It is all part of the same current we breathe now. They closed their windows not because they were ignorant, but because they understood fragility. They knew that survival depended not on courage, but on caution. In their eyes, the world beyond the shutter was vast and merciless, filled with plague, demons, and the cold indifference of night. To close the window was to choose life, even if it meant never breathing freely. And as the modern world hums with filtered air and sealed glass towers, perhaps we are not so different. We still cling to our walls and our illusions of control. We still hold our breath when the world grows uncertain. Because deep down, we still fear what they feared, not the air itself, but what it carries. The reminder that safety has always been an illusion, and that every breath, from the Dark Ages to now, is a leap of faith.